Okay, tonight we begin with Nehemiah. We're not going to go back into history and leave it up there, except in our own mind's eye. And as we come out here, what period of time would you call this that we're in now? All right, the restoration, that's right. They've gone into Babylonian captivity. Everything in Jerusalem was torn down. And now then we studied the book of Ezra. And who was the first man that came back and started rebuilding? Zerubbabel. What did he rebuild? The temple. The second man, Ezra. What did he do? The law, restoring the law. Now then we have Nehemiah. Nehemiah is going to come back and restore the walls that is around Jerusalem then. So we pick up our story then with Nehemiah here. And he's a very interesting character because there's a lot of similarity between us and Nehemiah here. Now, Nehemiah is going to rebuild the walls. Now, there's an actual picture of the walls being torn down in Hezekiah's day there, and this would be after that. So these walls, once you kind of look at it there, that it's just down there you see knee-deep and so forth, you can step right over it, and we'll look at the walls the way that they would be finished in just a little bit. Nehemiah here is going to go back and rebuild the walls of Jerusalem then. As we look at him, I want to spend just a little time talking about Nehemiah and how we are related to him in this way in here, that he entered in to do an unbelievable job. Now, after he got the walls rebuilt, that's the way that they would look, only they would be a lot taller than this is right here. And when you start looking at that, stop to think, if you didn't have a forklift, you didn't have a bulldozer, all you had was just, let's say, us out here somewhere, how long would it take us, without any tools, to build that wall like that and put that wall up there? It's just amazing, the thing really that they are getting ready to do in here, in all of this. Now, things we can learn from Nehemiah is this. He lived in a unique era, and so do we. Now, he lived in a unique era of when his religion had been totally wiped out, and he's coming back to rebuild it. Now, the difference is that they had a physical job to do. God had given them a physical temple, a physical city, and they were to be in that physical place. With us, it is spiritual. But their physical was wiped out, and so our spiritual has also been wiped out. When you go back and you think about it, you say, what do you mean by that? I mean, as you go back to the days of the apostles, when the Lord sent the Holy Spirit on the day of Pentecost, established the church, that one true church, what happened to that one true church as the years went by? And by, let's say, 1000 A.D., what had happened to that church? It was gone. They had changed it. They had mutilated it. Unrecognizable. It was gone. Now, it comes down into our generation, and there really is where our forefathers, the last generation, really found it. In other words, it's gone. What do we do? Well, what we do is what Nehemiah did. Let's suppose that Nehemiah, Zerubbabel, and those men had gone back over to Jerusalem, and they looked at it and they'd say, well, this has just been absolutely torn apart. Let's go build another temple and another wall in a more convenient place. Let's go over to Joppa and build, because it'd be easier to do over there. Would that have worked? No, see, that wouldn't work. Well, what about us today if we say, well, the one church that the Lord established was destroyed back in the Dark Ages, so let's just take anything. Let's just take an easy way. Let's build us a religion. Well, we can see, no, that is not going to work. So what we're going to try to do is to restore the one true religion the same way that Nehemiah tried to restore that one true city and wall that's right there. Now, there's some things that we can learn from Nehemiah. He restored the walls of Jerusalem, and we are restoring the church back the way it was. The walls were the protection of Jerusalem that was back there, And we also have walls to protect the church. We have certain things that we need to make sure that the church really is not destroyed here. So there's a lot of similarity that we'll point out. I'm just going to throw out a few things in here. Here it is in 1 Corinthians, the 10th chapter. The Apostle Paul tells us that the reason these things were written, they were all written for our example, that we can learn. And when Nehemiah did that, and it was pleasing to God, then if we do the same thing, we know we're pleasing to God. And so we can learn from the example here of Nehemiah then. Now, we're going to see nothing accomplished without challenges. That whole stuff that we've got over there on the left, regardless of what it is, it takes work, doesn't it? In other words, anything you do takes a whole lot of work. And that also includes building a wall in Jerusalem or building a church in Monroe or anywhere else. It takes diligence. It takes work in order to be able to do that. Now, Nehemiah faced some problems, and we will face problems too. There are just a whole lot of similarities that we've got, and many of our problems will be just like his. Now, he was born in exile under Persian rule. He had never been over to Jerusalem until he heard about this, and he comes on over. Rebuilding the walls, which he had never seen, he didn't know anything about. He was a wine bearer to the king, and so he's getting a job now that he's not experienced with. We're born in America, 10,000 miles away from Jerusalem, there, 2,000 years on down the line, and trying to rebuild a church that we've never seen. We weren't back there in A.D. 33. We didn't hear Paul preach. We didn't sit there and worship in that particular situation. But how can we do that? Do we have any kind of blueprint? See, we have the blueprint that tells us what that church is like. Now, when Nehemiah goes back, how does he know where to build the walls? Is he going to go out and look and say, well, I think it would be better to build the walls around this way. It'd be easier. How's he going to know? Well, he's going to survey, and he's going to look at the foundations, see, and what is left over, and follow it, and here's where that wall goes, see? And then we're going to rebuild where that wall goes in there. So we have the same situation really when we get in there. Now, he prepared himself to be used by God. He got ready to face the problem as it really was. He sat down, he wept, he mourned for days, scared to death to go out and do that. He had that proper attitude, like other men of the Bible had. David, Job, and Peter. They all knew that they had been involved in sin, and Nehemiah knows that the reason Jerusalem is destroyed, and why was it destroyed? Because of sin. See, God had it destroyed because of sin. So they confessed their sins then to do that. Okay, as we look at this, he approached the work, or he approached God before working. He goes to him in prayer. He opens his heart. He honors God in prayer. He confesses the sins of the forefathers. His prayer is based upon the promises and the name of God. I'm doing this, Lord, for your name, just like Samuel and David had done before, praying for the sake of the name of God, to try to keep things going for God's sake, for the sake of God, not just for something that somebody really wanted here. Now, he knew what he wanted to do, and he was prepared when God provided the opportunity. He's getting ready to do whatever needed to be done, and he left it up to God to provide that. He's going to go in, and he's going to ask the king to please release me that I may rebuild it. That's the job that I'm after. It's the same attitude that Isaiah had. And when God told Isaiah about the job that was out there, he needed somebody to send, and it's going to be a tough job. And Isaiah then said, Lord, here am I, send me. Well, that's the attitude that Nehemiah had. That is, that I'm here, even though I'm not a man that is a wall builder, I'm here, and so send me here. Now, the king asked him how long you'll be gone. Nehemiah gave him a definite time. Now, Nehemiah doesn't tell us how long he gave him the time, but he gave him a definite time and said, let me go for this time, and I'll rebuild that wall in this period of time. Would that teach you and me the idea of setting aside a time schedule, time limit? Here's what we're going to do, and here is when we're going to do it. See, we're going to set up a period of time in being able to do these things. Now, you've got to anticipate challenges and solutions. And he presented the plan to the people. He goes back and he said, here it is. Here's what we're going to do. He had thought this thing over in there. The people rose to the challenge. They said, we are ready. You think Nehemiah could build that wall by himself? No. And so the way it is with us. If this church in Monroe grows and prospers, it's not going to be by any one man. It's not going to be with the preacher. It's not going to be with the elders. It's not going to be with the deacons. It's going to be by everybody. It's going to be by everybody that's going to rise to do that. They said, let us arise and build. And that needs to be our attitude. To let us arise and build. And each one of us doing what little bit that we feel that we have the ability to do. Now, let's look at this gigantic job that he had. Here's the city of Jerusalem. Now there, where I put the yellow line, that's the wall. Now, that's a wall around just part of that city, see, that they're getting ready to rebuild in there. Now, everyone helped except the nobles. Over in chapter 3 and in verse 5, it's kind of an interesting thing in here. It says, and next to them so-and-so, but their nobles put not their necks to the work of their Lord. In other words, the rulers, the nobles, the big boys, they didn't put their neck to the work. They had other people to do it in there. So that's a sad situation. But here's the impressive thing. That chapter, chapter 3, tells what the people did. And certain people went to certain sections of the wall. The wall where they lived, the wall that's in front of them. That's the wall that they took, and they said, we will rebuild that wall. Now, in verse 1 of this chapter, the high priest went out and built. Again, in the same verse, the common priest went out and built. And then, down in verses 8 and 31 and 32, the goldsmiths went out and built. And in verse 8, the perfumers went out. As you look at this, it's kind of interesting. Would you go get that group of people if you were going to build a wall around Monroe? Not that group, right? See, you'd look around and you find somebody. No, we need somebody else. Well, here's one that really impresses me, and that is down in verse 12. It says, and next to him repaired Shallum the son of so-and-so, the ruler of the half of the district of Jerusalem, he and his daughters. This guy and his daughters went out and repaired a certain section of that wall. See? Now, that's impressive to me. Men, women of all calibers went out to begin to build that wall. They were not professional wall builders there. As you look, there's a section of the wall that's around it. Nehemiah's wall would have been 18 to 25 feet high. That's in there. Here's a gate, and what he did was, we'll learn, he built from gate to gate. From this gate to this gate, you build. From this gate to this gate, you build. And then, after we get it done, then we'll put up the gates, you see, that is in there. So that's what a gate would look like in the wall around there. Here's another gate and a wall that goes around the city of Jerusalem. These things are just to give you an idea of what the walls would look like. See, the stone wall's a stone wall, but it's really impressive to us because we don't have any of them that's over here. So there would be the kind of walls that you really have that he would be talking about rebuilding then. An awesome job that he had. Another gate that is there. Here are stones that have fallen off. By the way, this is a picture of in 70 A.D., when the Romans went in, and they tore down stone by stone, that pile of stones are a pile that the Romans tore down and threw off. And they've left them there as a monument. In other words, those are the actual literal stones that they have. Think for a moment, if you went over, you and your daughters, and you walked up to that pile of stones, and you had to rebuild a wall with that pile of stones, how would you do it? No forklift. It's awesome to me to think about what those guys did, really, as far as those stones are concerned. There it is again to show you the size of those stones. And they got them up there, and they did it in there. Now, Nehemiah is going to say, down in chapter 4, verse 6, so we built the walls, for the people had a mind to work. And then in chapter 6, verse 15, he's going to tell us they did it in 52 days. Now, that's less than 2 months. In less than 2 months, they had that wall rebuilt. Just absolutely an awesome task, really, that they have there. Now, the next thing that we'll be looking at, really, are the tactics of the enemy. What did the enemy do? Because when they were building it, the enemies out there came and tried to stop them and keep them from rebuilding that wall. And that's where we're going to make a big parallel with us. We'll be able to see really what they did and what we do really in a situation like this. So right there is where we'll stop in our slides here today. If we can stop there we go. Okay, if we can stop that, and we'll get back to the enemy then at a later time. Probably not going to be able to get back to them tonight because we don't have that much time left, but that's okay. We're going to be taking 2 weeks on Nehemiah anyway. That kind of summarizes just a little bit some of the things that we're going to be pointing out here in Nehemiah. Now, let's start out in Nehemiah chapter 1 and down here in verse 1. So it's in the Shilev here, and that's the first month of the year there. And I said, Hannah, one of my brethren, came, and he and certain men out of Judah, and I asked them concerning the Jews that had escaped, that were left of the captivity, and concerning Jerusalem. What about the Jews back there who had escaped when Nebuchadnezzar came in 70 years ago? What are they doing? And what about the ones that, what was the guy's name that let them go back? The Persian king let them go back and paid the expenses. Remember the guy's name? Cyrus. Right, Cyrus. He let them go back, and he sent them back to go back and rebuild that temple and to take the law back. Now then, Nehemiah's over there, and he's carrying wine to the king. And so he's asking these other Jews, what about those people that's there? 3. And they said to me, the remnant that are left of the captivity, there in the province are in great affliction and reproach. The wall of Jerusalem is also broken down, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. So it's a bad time over in Jerusalem. The people over there are in great affliction. They're hurting greatly that's there. Verse 4. And it came to pass when I heard these words that I sat down and wept. Now, first of all, that might give us an indication of why Nehemiah was so successful. He had a certain kind of heart. He had an interest in the work of the Lord. And when he heard that the work of the Lord had come to a stop and that the people were in great distress, he sat down and he wept and he mourned certain days. That showed his attitude. That showed his concern. Nobody really does much unless they are really dedicated to a job. You could look out at 1,000 different things that you've had an opportunity to do that you could have done. You had no interest in them, and what did you do about it? Nothing. See? But if you've got a great interest, then you will do something, even though it looks like it's insurmountable. That's the way with Nehemiah. It just looks like it can't be done. So he said, I fasted and prayed before God of heaven, and I said, I beseech thee, O Jehovah, the God of heaven, the great and terrible God. Why would he call him the terrible God? That sounds kind of funny to us. The great and terrible God. Yes, the great and awesome God. The great God that can bring an earthquake the way it happened today. That great God that has all of this. That's what they mean by terrible. There's another word that we will get into as we get into the prophets more and more, and that is that Jehovah brought evil upon the cities. And Jehovah would bring evil upon this, and Jehovah brought evil upon that. And when we think of the word evil, it's not what is meant by that word. What does it mean if Jehovah brought evil upon Jerusalem? And he did. A bad situation, see? A terrible situation upon a city. He destroyed the city. It was evil from their viewpoint. It's a bad thing. We associate evil really with morality, don't we? And we'd say, well, a bad thing happened today, but we wouldn't say an evil thing happened today. You see, when we talk about the earthquake. But in the Bible, why that word is used quite often. Well, this way with terrible. So it's a term that shows the power of God, how great that God really is. So great and terrible, that keepeth covenant and loving kindness with them that love him, and keep his commandments. So this great God, notice how he's addressing him. Always address God appropriately. And here it is, he's a great God, he's a powerful God, and he's a God that keeps his covenant. By the way, when God brought the Chaldeans, or the Babylonians, down, and had them to wipe Jerusalem off the face of the map, was that keeping covenant with the Jews? It was, wasn't it? He had made a covenant with them back in Moses' day. When it came down, Moses brought the Ten Commandments down, and Moses is giving them the laws. God made a covenant. The covenant is this: if you will obey me, what will I do for you? I'll protect you in every way. I will not let any foreign nation overcome you. I will not have you to have any crop failures. You'll never have an animal that has a baby and it dies. Everybody will have good health. There won't be any sickness. I'll just bless you so much you can't believe it. But if you don't obey me, then he just reversed all these things. See? And so God is keeping covenant because they sinned, and so Nehemiah is recognizing that they deserve this. All right, verse 6. Let thine ear now be attentive, and thine eyes open, that thou mayest hearken unto the prayer of thy servant, which I pray before thee at this time, day and night, for the children of Israel, thy servant, while I confess the sins of the children of Israel. Now, he's going to confess those sins. What was it Ezra did? Same thing, isn't it? Confess the sins of Israel. As you back up, previous to these guys, there were two prophets who prophesied in Babylon. What were their names? In Babylon. Before they came out of captivity. When they went into captivity, God gave them two prophets, Daniel and Ezekiel. All right, Daniel was in there the whole 70 years, and right down at the end of the 70 years, Daniel read Jeremiah, and then it hit him. And he says, now I understand. And that God brought us in, and he'll bring us out. And Daniel fell on his knees, and he began to pray to God. And he prayed to God there in the 9th chapter. And guess what he did? Almost the whole prayer. Confess the sins. See, we have sinned. We have violated this. And you have kept your promise, and so forth. And while he was yet praying, God sent an angel to answer his prayer. So these great men all recognized the reason Jerusalem is destroyed is because of us, our forefathers. They were sinners. Now, he said, Yea, I and my father's house have sinned. We have dealt very corruptly against thee, and have not kept the commandments, nor the statutes, nor the ordinances, which thou commandest thy servant Moses. Remember, I beseech thee, the word that thou commandest thy servant Moses, saying, If we trespass, I will scatter you abroad among the peoples. But if ye return unto me, and keep my commandments, and do them, though your outcast were in the uttermost parts of the heavens, yet will I gather them from thence, and I will bring them into the place where I have chosen. So God's promise was, if you don't keep my commandments, I will send you and scatter you. If you'll repent and keep my commandments, I'll gather you back. I don't care how far you've been scattered. I'll gather you back into this place. So Nehemiah is praying and recognizing that. Verse 10. He said, Now these are thy servants and thy people whom thou hast deemed by thy great power and by thy strong hand. O Lord, I beseech thee, let now thine ear be attentive to the prayer of thy servant and to the prayer of thy servants, who delight and fear thy name and prosper. I pray thee, thy servant this day, and grant him mercy in the sight of this man. That's the king. So, before he goes in, he prays, Please grant me mercy in the sight of the king. Nehemiah doesn't know what's going to happen, but he prays that he may have mercy in the sight of the king. Let's see what happens. He said, Now I was cupbearer to the king in the month Nisan, in the 20th year of Artaxerxes the king, when wine was before him, and I took up the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had not been before time sad in his presence. I'd always put on a front. I'd always been happy and contented. I never let my problems be show on my face when I went in to the king in here. But he couldn't hold it back this time. And the king said unto me, Why is thy countenance sad, seeing thou art not sick? You're not sick? What's happened to you, Nehemiah? He said, This is nothing else but sorrow of heart. You're sad. How come you're sad? Then I was very sore afraid, scared to death. And I said unto the king, Let the king live forever. Why should not my countenance be sad when the city, the place of my father's sepulchres lieth waste, and the gates thereof are consumed with fire? So this is the reason I'm sad. And how could I not be sad when I hear about Jerusalem lying waste? And the king said unto me, For what dost thou make request? What would you ask me to do? What can I do about it? See, that's what can I do about it? Now we say, what can I do about it? Look in verse 5. In the last statement in verse 4. So I prayed to the God of heaven. And I said unto the king, Stop. How long was that prayer? You suppose he stopped and prayed for 30 minutes? No. This conversation went on. And when the king said, What do you want me to do about it? What did Nehemiah pray about? What did he pray for? I think all of us would know. I mean, same thing that we would pray for is just, help me, Lord. That's about all you could do. Just help me, Lord. Give me wisdom. Just make sure I say the right thing. He prayed to God very rapidly, and then he says, I said unto the king, If it please the king, and if thy servant have found favor in thy sight, that thou wouldest send me unto Judah, unto the city of my father's sepulchres, that I may build in. And the king said unto me, and the queen was sitting by him, For how long shall thy journey be? And when will you return? How long do you want off? So it pleased the king to send me, and I set him a time. So I told him, and he said, Fine, I'll send you over. Moreover, I said unto the king, If it please the king, let letters be given to me to the governors beyond the river. Now these would be to the governors as he goes out of Babylon, up over the Fertile Crescent, down into the land of Canaan, all of these countries that are in there. Give me letters that I may give to them, so that they'll let me pass through. Why is it that if he got a letter from this king, he could show it to any ruler between there and Jerusalem, and they'd let him pass through? This is the ruling king. This guy is ruling the world. So he said, I'd like for you to give me that, to let me pass through till I come to Judah, and then a letter unto Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the castle, which appertaineth to the house, and for the wall of the city, and for the house that I shall enter into. Now, 3 or 4 things in this. I pray that you'll give me a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest. Now that word forest, as you see in your footnote, at least in mine, it says park. The word paradise is a Persian word, and that's the word right here. That down in the king's paradise. What does paradise mean? Garden. That's the meaning of a paradise. A beautiful garden. So he had a section of land. Nobody knows where it is, how big it is. But he had a section of land, very choice trees and so forth, because there's not a lot of trees around Jerusalem that you'd be able to use to build like that. But the king had some trees like that. And so give me a letter to the man in charge of your forest so that I may cut out of there and do this. What is he wanted to do? Make beams for the gates of the castle. Now, what's the walls going to be made of? Rocks. But they'll use beams for certain parts of it and for the gates, you see, to make it out of there, why there'll be wooden gates. So that I may use it there, and for the gates of the castle which appertaineth to the house. Now, the house would be the temple. The castle that's around the temple, I don't think we've ever talked about this, but we talked quite a lot in this class about the temple. Didn't I show you a lot of, wasn't this a class where I showed you a lot of pictures of the temple and you're looking down upon it and all around it and you got that big temple mount? Okay, the temple is in there. Now, over on the northwest edge, which you don't have to remember, but outside the gate, outside the wall, there is a great, what would we call it? A big house, a big castle type thing that is made of rocks that soldiers would live in. And this is where the soldiers' headquarters would be. This is where they would live so they could protect the temple. And it was up high. Look over the gate. You sit there. You can see what happens in there. Be able to send soldiers in there at any time that you wanted to. And so it's a castle. What would be a better word for that? Okay, a tower. Oh, it's not quite high enough to be a tower. When I think of a tower, I think of something really high. And this is something that would go up above the walls, probably, well, maybe twice as high as the walls. And so it could be a tower. It could be a tower. I just don't want you to think of a real tall thing. Somebody else said another word. A fortress, right. That's what it's called so many times, a fortress. Now, this thing is built so nobody can get in it. I mean, this thing is built so you can take whatever battering rams you want, you can try to knock the stones out, and it's thick. You know, they make these walls, 10 or 12 feet thick in this thing because they don't want anybody to be able to get in there. And over the years, when people would get in this castle, you couldn't get them out if the enemy got in there. And we'll talk more about it when we get on down between the Testaments. Some of the enemies got in there, and there they were. And over here is this, and how are you going to get them out of there and so forth. So I said, I need to build that thing up so that I'll have this castle that is out there, and to keep the soldiers in. Okay, then he goes ahead and he says that appears there, and the king granted me according to the good hand of my God upon me. I look up there and I see that the it's time for the classes to be dismissed. Right there is a quitting place where we'll have to quit tonight, because if we take the next verse, we have to keep on going. By the way, this castle today, and back in New Testament times, and way back there, was called Antonio Castle. And it was named after Antony, the lover of Cleopatra. And so Cleopatra and him had an affair, and so they came down, and they then were friends and so forth, and finally Herod named this thing after Antony. And so it's the Antonia Castle then that is over there today. So it's been there for 2,000 years, named with that name. Okay,